24-year-old Sheree Magaro left her boyfriend's home one snowy night in February in 1987, planning a routine drive back to Pennsylvania. She never made it. Her car was later found burned, blood and tissue inside, while her personal belongings lay scattered nearby. The events of that night would shock investigators and change everything. Sheree Marie Utes Magaro was born on October 23, 1956, in Lebanon, Pennsylvania, to Thomas Magaro and Mary Utes, later known as Mary Grace Utes. She spent her childhood in Pennsylvania and completed her early education there, eventually graduating from Cedar Crest High School in 1974. During her school years, Sheree showed an interest in painting, a pursuit that reflected her creative nature and remained a noted part of her student life. After finishing high school, Sheree entered the workforce and spent several years teaching at Barbizon Modeling School. She later transitioned into a secretarial position at Control Data Corporation, a company that manufactured lottery machines. In this role, she established a reputation as a reliable and capable employee, recognized for her work ethic and consistency. Sheree married in 1982, but the marriage ended in divorce approximately 3 years later. She later became engaged to a colleague, reflecting changes in her personal life during that period. She was also a mother. Sheree gave birth to her son, Tony, when she was 26 years old and later retained full custody following her divorce. By 1987, Sheree was 30 years old and living at the Wheelo Farm Trailer Park outside Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. At that point in her life, she was balancing work, motherhood, and personal responsibilities shortly before the events that would lead to her disappearance that later became central to investigators. At the beginning of February 1987, Sheree Magaro was living in Pennsylvania while maintaining a relationship with her boyfriend, Frank Brown, who lived in Kennedyville, Maryland, on the Eastern Shore. She visited him regularly, and for this particular visit, she left her 4-year-old son, Tony, in the care of her mother for the weekend. Sheree planned to spend the night at Brown's home and return to Harrisburg early Monday morning so she could go to work. On Sunday, February 22nd, snow began falling during the early evening hours, and weather forecasters warned that a major winter storm was moving into the region. As conditions worsened, Sheree grew concerned about traveling the following morning and the possibility of becoming stranded by the storm. That evening, Sheree called her mother, Mary Grace Utes, to explain that she was considering leaving Kennedyville sooner than planned. Her mother urged her not to drive, warning that she would be traveling directly with the storm. Sheree responded that she needed to come home because of her job obligations. As the snowfall intensified, Sheree made the decision to leave that night rather than wait until morning, setting in motion the final known events before she vanished. The circumstances reflected a routine personal decision shaped by weather concerns and responsibilities she felt unable to postpone home. On the night of February 22, 1987, Sheree Magaro prepared to leave Kennedyville, Maryland, as the winter storm continued to strengthen. Between approximately 9 and 9:45 p.m., she said goodbye to her boyfriend, Frank Brown, and walked to her gray 1976 Ford Torino. She was traveling alone and expected the drive to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, to take about 2 hours under normal conditions. Sheree pulled away from the property and headed north as snowfall increased and visibility worsened. No confirmed sightings or communications were reported after her departure from Kennedyville. There were no phone calls, no messages, and no witnesses who later reported seeing her along the route that night. As the storm intensified, roads across Cecil County and surrounding areas became increasingly difficult to navigate. Traffic was light as many drivers stayed off the roads due to the deteriorating weather. Sometime during this overnight period, Sheree Magaro disappeared. She did not arrive at her home in Harrisburg and did not report to work the following morning. The hours following her departure passed without explanation. Her absence went unnoticed until the next day, when events unfolded that shifted concern into an active investigation. Sheree's departure from Kennedyville remains the last confirmed moment she was known to be alive there. The snowstorm that moved through Cecil County during the night of February 22, 1987, intensified rapidly as hours passed. What began as steady snowfall developed into a severe blizzard, eventually depositing approximately 18 inches of snow across the region. Roads became increasingly hazardous, visibility dropped, and familiar landmarks were obscured beneath drifting snow. As the storm worsened, travel conditions deteriorated throughout the area Sheree Magaro was driving through. Traffic on the roads diminished as residents remained indoors, and those already traveling focused on reaching shelter as quickly as possible. The isolation created by the weather reduced the likelihood that anyone would notice a stalled vehicle or a roadside encounter. During this overnight period, Sheree failed to reach her home in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. She made no contact with family, friends, or co-workers, and there were no reports of her arriving at any destination along the way. By the morning hours, it became clear that she had vanished somewhere during the height of the storm. The blizzard continued through the night, covering open fields, roadways, and surrounding rural areas in deep snow. This weather would later complicate efforts to determine where Sheree went after leaving Kennedyville. Her disappearance occurred entirely within these conditions, leaving no immediate explanation for what happened during storm. At approximately 9:30 a.m. on February 23, 1987, Maryland State Trooper Tom Kearns responded to an anonymous call reporting an abandoned vehicle in a field roughly 100 feet west of Route 213 in Cecil County. The location was about 2.5 miles south of the Bohemia River Bridge in the Hack Point area, approximately 15 miles from where Sheree Magaro was last seen. When Kearns arrived, he found a gray 1976 Ford Torino positioned in the snow-covered field, facing toward the Kent County border. The car was partially burned, and clothing was scattered nearby. Snow accumulation beneath the vehicle measured about 2 inches, indicating it had likely been left there between 10 and 10:45 p.m. the previous night. Investigators examined the vehicle and determined it was operable. The tires were intact, the engine started, and the car showed no signs of mechanical failure. Roughly 7 gallons of fuel remained in the tank, an amount sufficient to complete the drive Sheree had planned. The condition and placement of the car immediately raised concern. There was no indication that Sheree had become stranded due to weather or mechanical problems. Instead, the scene suggested deliberate actions had taken place before the vehicle was abandoned in the field. The discovery marked the first confirmed physical trace connected to her disappearance and prompted authorities to begin a wider investigation focused on the surrounding rural area that morning hours later. Inside the partially burned gray 1976 Ford Torino, investigators discovered traces of blood, hair, and body tissue, including brain matter. The blood and tissue indicated a violent encounter had occurred prior to the car being abandoned, while no blood was found on the ground surrounding the vehicle. Clothing items were scattered near the scene, suggesting a sudden or forced exit from the car. Approximately 100 yards from the abandoned vehicle, Sheree Magaro's purse was recovered. Inside were her driver's license, a tube of lipstick, and several pieces of valuable jewelry. Despite the presence of these personal belongings, her body was nowhere to be found. A search involving more than 100 officers, cadets, and soldiers was conducted across the surrounding cornfields and open terrain. Teams combed through snow-covered areas systematically, but no additional evidence, items, or human remains were located. Divers were later brought in to examine nearby waters, including areas adjacent to the Bohemia River and bridges, but these efforts also yielded no results. Several days after the discovery, a bloodstained men's shirt was found near the Route 213 bridge spanning the Bohemia River. Laboratory analysis confirmed that the blood belonged to Sheree Magaro. The combination of evidence inside the car, scattered personal effects, and the blood on the shirt established a strong indication that she had been the victim of a violent crime, setting the stage for authorities to treat the case as a homicide. Following the discoveries at the scene, authorities officially classified Sheree Magaro's disappearance as a homicide. Despite the absence of her body, the medical examiner determined she was deceased based on the blood and brain matter recovered from the partially burned vehicle. The cause of death was established as blunt force trauma to the head. Investigators did not release specific information regarding the type of weapon used, but the presence of brain matter indicated significant and lethal head injury prior to the abandonment of the car. Divers and search teams were deployed to examine nearby rivers, bridges, and surrounding terrain, but no human remains were recovered. The evidence suggested that any violent act had likely occurred elsewhere before the vehicle was left in the snow-covered field. Investigators concluded that the crime involved deliberate and purposeful actions, as the car was still operable, contained fuel, and showed no signs of mechanical failure. Additional discoveries, including a blood-stained men's shirt located near the Route 213 bridge, reinforced the determination of homicide. Laboratory testing confirmed that the blood belonged to Sheree, further supporting the conclusion that she had been fatally injured before her remains were removed or hidden. The combination of evidence at the vehicle, the nearby items, and the blood on clothing indicated a violent encounter had occurred and prompted authorities to pursue investigative leads focused on identifying potential suspects and reconstructing her final known movements. Witnesses reported seeing a Ford Mustang with Pennsylvania license plates parked in a cornfield near the location where Sheree Magaro's Torino was later found. The vehicle's hazard lights were flashing, and its design corresponded to certain model years, specifically 1974, 1978, 1983, or 1987. One witness recalled observing a man standing beside the Mustang, speaking with a woman seated in a car resembling Sheree's gray Torino. Investigators released descriptions of two men they hoped to interview, though some speculated the sightings could pertain to a single individual. On the following morning, a man attempted to use Sheree's credit card at a Sears department store in Bel Air to purchase a television. The store clerk conducted a routine check and confirmed the card belonged to Sheree. The man stated the card was his wife's, then left the store quickly and was never identified further. Later, one of Sheree's credit cards was discovered along Whitehall Road, roughly 10 to 11 miles north of the field where her car had been abandoned. A search of the surrounding area failed to uncover any additional evidence. These accounts and discoveries contributed to the investigation, suggesting that Sheree may have encountered someone intentionally involved in her disappearance or that her personal property had been taken after her death. Investigators considered multiple theories regarding Sheree Magaro's disappearance, focusing on circumstances suggested by the evidence. Mechanical failure was ruled out, as her vehicle was operable, fueled, and showed no signs of malfunction. Authorities examined whether she may have stopped to assist someone in need, with family and friends providing different perspectives on whether she would have offered help. Some believed she would have stopped, while others considered her cautious nature. Her mother maintained that Sheree would have likely offered assistance. The possibility of robbery was explored, including the attempted use of her credit card at a department store. Investigators also considered whether she may have encountered someone she knew aside from her ex-husband or fiancé, both of whom were officially cleared as suspects. The deliberate burning of her vehicle, presence of blood and tissue inside, and scattered personal effects indicated that any violent act likely occurred elsewhere before the car was abandoned. Multiple perpetrators were suggested due to varying witness accounts and the complexity of evidence. Sheree's family offered a $20,000 reward for information regarding her whereabouts. In May 1989, she was declared legally dead by Judge Lee Swope in Harrisburg. At the time of her disappearance, she was 30 years old, 5 feet 3 inches tall, weighed between 140 and 160 pounds, and had brown hair and brown eyes. Despite extensive investigation, searches, and public appeals, her body has never been recovered. The case remains unsolved, with investigators and family continuing to seek answers, leaving Sheree Magaro's disappearance as an enduring cold case mystery.